All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes and we'll let people get logged in. Welcome to the April 10th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. My name is Greg Ondo and I'm presenting from Washington, D.C. area in the United States. We're going to let some people get logged in. And as we do that, if people are watching this past the live event, you could go ahead and kind of skip ahead. Maybe usually takes about 8 to 10 minutes for everyone to get logged in. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And if you have questions, we will be able to, if you want to enter those in the comments field, you could do that. You could also, for future Hangouts, submit them in advance at clubcubase@steinberg.de. If you're not watching it, if you're watching kind of the stream of it after the live event, you don't have to introduce yourself. You're welcome to, of course, but we'll let people get logged in. And feel free to kind of ask questions. Like many of you, I have my son at home, so he may interrupt us in the middle of the hangout if he gets a little bored. But we'll try to make sure. I think I got a nice Disney show for him to watch for a couple of hours. He's done with his schoolwork for today, so but we may have an interruption or two for my son. I'll apologize in advance for that. All right, so we'll go ahead and people are getting logged in. We see that. That's wonderful. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure audio is going through. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and check out, see where people are coming from. So once again, we are doing these hangouts since we're in our stay home era. We're doing these hangouts twice a month, or twice a week rather, on Tuesdays and Fridays starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you subscribe to the Cubase YouTube channel, you'll be notified when hangouts are coming, so that's a good way. And so make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, and I'll go ahead and just we see different questions coming in. Okay. All right, so we have Stanley from Poolsville, Maryland, longtime attendee. Robbie Bowling in Dallas. Good to see you. Also in Taylor. Okay, we have Rhode Island, Maine. I know Taylor's from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, near where my father grew up. And we also, I know Robbie's from Dallas, Stanley's from Poolsville, Maryland, not too far from me. We have Maine, Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, Moscow. Okay, we have Millard again from Pennsylvania. Okay, we have Chile, India, Finland. Okay, Fort Washington, Maryland. All right, good to see Daryl right across the river from me. Okay, Cleveland, Istanbul, Colorado. Okay. Okay, we have Sweden. All right, India, Belgium, Switzerland. Okay, and one of the things, we should have like the index of topics hopefully done by tomorrow morning, so that could help navigate through all the different questions that have gone on. Okay, all right, so I see a question about tape stops. Okay, so I see a question on MIDI tracks, putting effects on. Okay, so a question about audio or musical mode. We have UK, India, some more people UK. Okay, Brooklyn. All right, we have Alfred from, I think it's Lisby, Maryland. Yeah, talk about Chuck Levin's. It's a local store in DC area. It's a wonderful store. Okay, so we're getting people logged in. Okay, we have Tampa, Birmingham. Okay, just seeing some questions coming in. Sweden, Texas, Ireland. All right, so I see the question about Melodyne and Cubase Elements. Uruguay, New York, Vancouver. All right. France, UK. More people from Pennsylvania. A lot of Pennsylvania people on Slovenia. Netherlands, Italy. All right, Vietnam. This must be very late or very early in Asia. Okay, we have Weatherford, Texas. Okay, so questions on arpeggios. All right, so I have my phone going crazy. All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. We have some more people logging in. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we have some questions. Let me just scroll back up through the list. I'll try to get through as many questions as possible. We'll try to go about 3 hours. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Just scrolling back through the timeline. Okay. Question, does anyone know what happened to Apache 5? So when you come to a MIDI track, I'll just quickly add a MIDI track here, or an instrument track under MIDI inserts. You'll have Apache 5 here, and this will work as an arpeggiator. So if I have, I'll just load it on a quick instrument track. So if you're not familiar with it, you could just kind of come here, and this is like an arpeggiator plugin. So I will just load it up into an instance of Retrolog. So if I have a sound like that, I could just simply come over here, and on this particular track, I'll go to my MIDI inserts, and we could also do this as a send, but I will just kind of come over here to, and we'll make sure, all right, so my MIDI inserts is enabled. So we just come here and we could go to our Apache 5. And what this is going to allow you to do is we could actually, I could just hold down one chord. And then as I hold down just a block chord, let's say a B, I'll do a C major chord. We could just have this arpeggiate, and we could just place this as to be 8th notes or 16th notes, or different rhythmic values. And as you would change, and you could set the key range. So the Apache 5, if you're looking for it, just go to under MIDI inserts, and there's a kind of a whole little suite of different MIDI plugins that are available. So it's still part of Cubase. And I just did a tutorial video on it. If you look under the Greg and Ondo Q&A series, we just did that in the last batch of videos we've done. There's one on Apache 5 and Apache SX. All right. So we have a question. Can we use Melodyne in Cubase Elements 10.5? You could run it as a plugin. So Melodyne could work in a couple different ways. One, it could work as a standalone editor. It could also work through technology called ARA2. But you could also just run it as an insert plugin. So you could run that in the Cubase Pro version, will do ARA2. But if you wanted to run it in Cubase Elements, you could just simply run it as an insert, and you would see kind of all of your available inserts. And if Melodyne is installed, you could run it there. So yes, you can. Okay, it's going through more questions. And we had some people, and again, if you want to email questions in advance, you could send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay. How can you do a tape stop effect like what Verify does in another program? So there's a couple different ways of doing tape stop style effect. So one is you could just on like a master effect, if you wanted to come here, there's some really handy tools in one of the plugins called Loop Mash FX, and this would be under Other. So here you could do, and this will be horribly inappropriate for this particular track. So let's say if I'm kind of playing along, and we could trigger these by individual MIDI notes. So if I want to do kind of if I wanted to even come here and so really all you had to do is you could kind of just hit this particular button, and you can set different speeds. So different effects that you could do, say if I wanted to do. So again, you could just kind of hit this one here, the tape stop to. I'll just kind of throw it in here before the chorus. And you could just actually set a MIDI track and output it once you have this plugin. Once it's instantiated, you can then just route any MIDI track to it. So you could just have that go directly to the Loop Mash FX and just kind of play, if you want like faster tape stop. So you could play that in MIDI or just automate the plugin itself. So if I wanted to just automate that parameter, I could come here. So now when I just play it back, if I did it correctly. So you could do that. You don't have to do it on the entire mix bus, but just so it's obviously heard. All right, hang on. My son is knocking. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we'll move on to some other questions. Okay, so we did the tape stop. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so we have a question. Does anyone know how to put effects on MIDI channels like you can in older versions? So if we wanted to take a look at effects, I think it's really kind of handled the same way. So if you have an instrument track, and let's say if I have my retro log and I wanted to put an audio effect on it, when we go to the inspector, you can see kind of the audio path here. And if I just say, okay, let's put on a delay as an insert, I can come here and I'll just put on like an eighth note delay. And if it's set to a MIDI track, all you would have to do is, if this is being routed to a virtual instrument, so let's say if I routed this to Retrolog, we could, there's two different faders that can happen for a MIDI track. One fader could be the MIDI volume, and the other could be the audio characteristics once it's routed out to a virtual instrument. So you could actually click here and you can see kind of the audio characteristics here. So and at that point, this is where you could add different effects, EQs and plugins, and be able to see different sources. But if you go straight to, that's a MIDI track. If you have it on an instrument track, you could just click on the edit channel settings and that will adjust just that easily. So you can still add effects to MIDI stuff. If it's like an external instrument, you may need to go to the audio connections and go to external instruments and connect that into the audio inputs of the outputs of the instrument into the audio inputs. Launch it as an external instrument. Like you could just say, okay, I want to come here, go to my external plugins, and you can say like I have a montage. And now once you have that set up, you could very easily route that into your VST effects. One other apology, I have a new house that's being built right next to me, so you may hear some hammering going on in the background. So hopefully today's the last big day of hammering. They're working on the roof. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so it says, I can't resize my lower window very much. Is there a level in preferences? Can you show us that? It's really kind of intended to, we could go kind of this tall, but at a certain point, we need to be able to actually see different data. So if you're doing editing of different parts, we could, just come over here and double click and to make sure that there's a certain amount of height. There's no real preference that will allow you to do that. So if you have a smaller screen, some people will choose not to work with the lower zone. And when you go into like the mix console, to have that be its own dedicated window. So, if you have a smaller workspace to work with, depending upon your monitor resolution, that could help you with that. So, but there really isn't a preference necessarily. So you can make it taller, but not necessarily so much shorter, because it kind of could lose its effectiveness in being too small at a certain point. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, it says, how do I save an audio loop in musical mode so it can follow the tempo when imported into any other DAW? So if you have just an audio file, I'll just do new project here quickly. And I'll just go to my loops. Okay, so let's say I just drag in my loop. Now, loops can have additional metadata as as files. So if I wanted to come here, if we know kind of Cubase will do a good job of, a lot of times loops will have like within the name of the loop itself, like here we see 02097. So that, Cubase will do a good job of figuring out that that's probably 97 beats a minute. So when we play, that's going to play back at kind of its native resolution. So, but sometimes you could, when you export a particular file, I believe if you get to the export audio mixdown, that you could insert the tempo definition of the file directly here. So that way, when you export files, the tempo definition could be exported. So if you're using it with another program, you could do that. Another method is if it has like varying tempos. So let's say it was a live performance that wasn't perfectly steady. If you go to the audio to advanced, you could just write set definition from tempo, and that will write in all the different tempo changes or the current tempo information into a file that doesn't. But probably the quickest way is just to do like an export audio mixdown and make sure that you have the insert tempo definition checked. And that way, any file that you export with the batch export would automatically have that as the internal metadata that could be read by other programs. Okay. Okay, so it says I downloaded, this is from Taylor, good to see you on a Hangout. I downloaded VST Connect 4.040. Screen says SE Pro, but the installer says VST Connect Pro. Is this the paid version, or it will update the free version that came with Cubase 9.5? I believe it's kind of a universal for the Cubase side of things. It's going to be, I believe it's the same installer for both of them. The Pro version is the one that's a paid version. So the SE that comes with Cubase will allow you to do, 2 channels. The Pro version can allow you to do up to 16 channels and MIDI and kind of work within the same network. But the one thing to be aware of is to make sure that the VST Connect Performer version is matching the version that you have for your VST Connect SE. So if someone has an older Performer version, you may get an error message indicating that there's a, different versions or a mismatch with versions or something like that. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to see and edit slices in Groove Agent SE while playing patterns? So let's go ahead and take a look. I think I have a project that could show this. Okay, so let's say if I have like a drum loop here, and let's say if I wanted to open up just a blank instance of Groove Agent, so I will switch to my instrument patterns. I'll drag this over. And now I will just unmute that so we could trigger that particular drum pattern here. And if I wanted to slice up the drum loop, I could just come right over here and say, let's create slices. Now each drum sound has been mapped automatically to different slices. And as we do this, it's now created a pattern pad here. So I'm just going to make sure I reread the question. Okay, so it says, is there a way to set and edit slices in Groove Agent SE while playing patterns? So if we've done this, one of the things that you could do is you could drag this out to a MIDI track or an instrument track, and I see my slices here. So I'll go ahead and just solo that. So what that's done is it's created a MIDI file that's going to be, basically slices of our different parts that we see. So each element will be individually triggered here in Groove Agent. So if I wanted to be creative with that, let's say, I'll just kind of take that one MIDI part. I'll move this out of the way. Let's make some quick duplications. So this way I could now copy that same MIDI pattern over. And now what I want to do is just kind of randomly change. Very scientifically, of course. And let's say if I wanted to, just take that pattern there and reverse it, we could just select reverse. And now I could have kind of variations on my original drum loop. And flip the beat around and go right back to where we were. So that way you could kind of see the individual elements, and each pad here is representing one of the slices. So you have up to 128 slices. So if that isn't what you're looking for, Taylor, just kind of let me know in the comments. But hopefully that will answer your question. Okay. Okay, so question, is there a way to save an audio file with a track preset? So the track presets are really intended to not include the data, that's on them, but really intended for, all of your different, EQs and effects and level and panning. So I'll just jump to this project here quickly. What you can do is a different technique. So I will just select this particular file here, and we could choose to, export selected tracks. So if we export that track, this would contain all of the settings for, panning, EQ, inserts, EQs, channel strip, and the media. And if you wanted to do this also, you could just say, I wanted to import. It's kind of a little goofy because it's going to be export selected tracks. But when you import, it's a track archive. Another method of doing that, and that a track archive or exporting of selected tracks can basically just, have that track exportable so that you could just simply import it into any other project. With Cubase 10.5 and Cubase 10, they've also added a lot more capabilities where you may not have to do that so much, but because you could actually just say, I want to import tracks from project, select a particular project, and you could say, I wanted these tracks, I want to put this folder, I wanted to import the events or not, the channel and inspector settings, include or exclude automation. So we could just simply, import all those different functions without having to save a track archive. But if it's something that you want to do regularly, those are a couple of different techniques to work with, Taylor. Okay. Going on, thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so question, when creating a preset in Groove Agent or the sample track, where are the audio files for that preset stored? So let me jump back to my Groove Agent. Went away from it too quickly. Okay, so we'll activate this project. Okay, so if I have, all these samples done here, we could choose to, if we click on the agent itself, we could choose to export kit with samples. And at that point, you could choose where that kit will be, so if you want to put it on your desktop, we'll call it Hangout Test. So you could do it just like that. For the sampler track, as soon as audio is dragged into the sampler track, if we look at our pool window, so when we come directly here, so we see my audio settings here, I'll drag an audio file. Let me just find a quick. So I drag in a sample into the sampler track, and now when we go to our pool window, it's actually going to be stored within the sampler track within the pool. So this could automatically get stored into the same project that you're currently using for the project. So it just kind of goes into a subfolder within the project folder under sampler track. Okay. All right. So we have Trevor from Hamilton, Ontario. Good to have you on. Okay. Okay. So going through. Okay. So it says I purchased T guitar and it never installed properly. Now I get a message telling me that it's missing every time I load Cubase. How do I get rid of the message? So I think if you go to like the Steinberg library manager, you can come over here. So let's just go. So, and this is a utility that's installed. So we go to our Hallian instruments, and then you could select the T guitar. I don't have it installed on this computer, and just click on remove. And I think that should take care of it. And you may get prompted one more time after removing it. And then you could just remove it from Cubase looking for it the next time, and then you won't get that message. I just had to do it this morning on my computer as well. So once again, just go to the Steinberg library manager if you have, and then I would just download and reinstall again. And if you needed to move content to another source, you could just click on move if you needed to move it to a different drive. But at this point, you could choose just click remove here, and then the next time you get the message, it'll be a slightly different message. Then you could remove it from Cubase looking at it, and you should be, you shouldn't get the message and should be able to reinstall from scratch. Okay. Okay, so it says, Dear Greg, I've been struggling to export a drum track created with Groove Agent with a drum map to Dorico via Music XML. So let me see if I quickly have a part. So let's say if I have this. Okay, so if you have a drum map, sometimes like the MIDI drum maps may not carry over, and I haven't tried this, but something to be aware of is, let's say if I'm here and I create a drum map from the instrument. All right, so now when I go to double click, I could see all the drum map symbol, all the drum symbols here. And if I go into, let's just do a horrific notation, and I don't have it quite set up to do XML. So if you have, one thing to check if you have separate input and output notes, you may want to, like, if you change this, you know, you may get a message, if, like, when you go to, you could get a message saying, do you want to transform, and it may be under the MIDI. You'll see this O note conversion. So if you've done any remapping in the I note and O note, try to set the O note conversion, and that will kind of make sure that if you've remapped, that this output note will automatically kind of be the written note. So I'm not sure if you've done a lot of the notation aspects directly inside of, let me just try this quickly. I'll just remove these tracks. Right. I wanted that part back. Let me just. So, unless, I know a lot of people don't necessarily do the full drum notation here, but let's say, I think I have to be in the score editor to do music XML. So let's say if I've come here, and now export as a music XML. And I'm just going to check my path where I did that. Let's put it on my desktop for easy finding. But unless you've actually done all the drum mapping here, you may be better actually, if you've done a lot of the drum placement, and a lot of times people may not do that because that's why you're transferring it over to Dorco. You may be better to just simply, start with, to export it as a standard MIDI file to get the data over. But let's take a quick look. I'm just going to check my file name quickly here. See if I did the right one. Yeah, so I think you're maybe better sending it as a standard MIDI file. But I'm not sure if you've spent a lot of time, but I think that would probably be a better use for that. So I would check that out. And if if there's some reason that, if you spent a lot of time notating and doing the drum notation in Cubase already, then that might make sense. But I could play with it a little bit more. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to insert a delay in samples on a track for alignment, like time adjuster in PT? So all you have to do is, if you have any event, we could come here, right click on the main timeline, and you could choose just to put anything in samples. So if I have, an audio file here, I could select the audio file. And then at this point, I could choose just to, I could see kind of the start, and end position. So at this point, you could adjust, the start position in samples. Okay. Pardon me for my son. Hang on just 1 second. All right. So once you're here, you could just simply choose, let's say I'll do it a little larger so you could see, whatever your actual, if I wanted to move it by 100 samples, you could also just simply, so as you adjust with kind of your left and right mouse buttons, I could just move it by samples here. And if you wanted to move it by milliseconds, we could do that from the inspector here. But if you wanted to just nudge a couple things, some samples over for aligning different things, just switch your main timeline and you have kind of a primary and secondary time display. So, if you don't see that on the main transport, you could just simply activate, and if you go to where you see these 3 dots, hold that down and move that over to the right. And you could choose for this time format to be samples. And then you could hit the period on a computer keyboard to toggle back and forth between like bars and beats and samples, and just use your scroll wheel here. And then you could adjust, by samples just that easily. Okay, just going through different questions. Okay. Okay, so still going through different introductions. Okay, so question, can you please show us how to set up VST Connect SE on the side of the Cubase user? So what you need to do is just go to your VST Connect SE under VST Cloud, and we'll choose to create a VST Connect. So I'll just do this at a brand new project so you could kind of see what's going on under the hood. So we could come over here and, this will kind of work in conjunction with the control room. So you want to make sure that in the audio connections, we'll go to the control room, and we want to make sure, I'll just delete this for now. I will remove that Q send. Okay. Okay, so let's say, I wanted to remove, I don't have any headphones going in. Okay, so what I want to do now is go to my VST Connect SE. We'll say create VST Connect. At this point, we can choose our device for talkback so that we could talk into a microphone and the performer can hear it. Hit OK. It will now automatically create the track. It's created the Q mix also. We'll log in with your My Steinberg credentials. So I'll just come here. We're going to get logged in. We can now look for different friends if you wanted to. So you could search for people or find users. Once you kind of see them, what you want to do is you could click here to communicate and talk back with them. and just place this track into. You want to send the other tracks through the control room, so that if we have other tracks that we need to send it out to their headphone mix. So if I have, let's say, 4 tracks of audio, I can now go into my full mixer view. And if they have a webcam, you could actually choose to see them on the webcam, and you could talk. At this point, we can just, go into our full mixer view, and you want to go to make sure that the Q mixes are enabled in the racks. So we want to see Q sends. Activate the Q sends, and we want to just basically say, we want the performer to hear these tracks, and then it's literally just kind of hit record on them, and they'll be tracking. So you'll hit record, the signal goes out to them, then they record, and the signal is recorded directly back into your project. So there's a new version is released last week, so if you had problems with it before, and that seems to be working really well. We have people doing really exciting things with VST Connect, especially in our stay home era. Okay. Okay, so hi Greg, hope you're doing well and staying healthy. Could you please let me know how I can make automation to create round robins for violins in Hallian 6 so they can sound more realistic? So there's a couple of ways of doing round robins. So one is that you could do it in a couple of different ways. So I think if we wanted to, I'll show it even in Groove Agent SE, so people, it's applicable there as well. So if I drag this over, we could, if I drag samples over, I'll just jump back and I'll just drag in some loops. So let's say if I had, these samples and I wanted to drag them onto multiple pads, and if I had, different samples on different velocity layers, we can add those to, so if I wanted to switch between all these different sample layers on this particular pad, one of the things you could do is in Groove Agent, you could set it up for round robin, and that will just kind of, every time you hit the pad, can send, can have it automatically go to different samples. In Hallian, let me just take a quick look. A lot of the sample libraries themselves will allow you to do. So I'll just add a quick instrument track. So even if I wanted to go to like Iconica, and we'll just load up like a clarinet. Okay, we'll have lots of different articulations. And if I unmute the track, that'd be helpful. So when you go to like the macro editor, a lot of instruments will automatically be set up for different round robin. So, that could be done, on the different instruments if you wanted to have, different options. And I think if you're doing it from scratch, let me just create a bunch of, I'll create an empty program here quickly. So let me just, Okay, so if I wanted to start with that sample, and then we'll go into or edit into our zones. And let's say go to mapping, and let's say I just wanted to put a whole bunch of samples onto one particular pad here. Okay, so I think if you go maybe into the sample editing, and I probably won't be able to find it, but it's, if we go to mapping, let's, so there's different playback modes here. I think you're going to find it in the, I'll just take a quick look, and I won't spend 18 hours looking for it. But I could look it up if you want to email me at maybe under variation groups. Okay, so if you go to edit sound, enable variation groups. So here you could set up, different round robins, random, exclusive, random, so that you don't. And people, if you don't understand why you want a round robin, if you have like a repeated note, you may not necessarily want the same sample to be constantly triggered over and over and over again. So round robin will just kind of alternate. So that's how you can do it. So, if you're making your own sounds, just go to edit to sound, and under variation groups, you could turn on a round robin there. And I think that will help you out. Okay, so I see a question: how to record arpeggios from Montage in Cubase 10.5. Is this I'm assuming this is the Yamaha Montage. So I think the Yamaha Montage won't actually, I could be mistaken, I don't have one, but I could check with some of my colleagues, but I'm not sure. I know that in the past, a lot of the Yamaha keyboards, while they had their own arpeggios, didn't transmit the arpeggiated information out of the MIDI port. It was only kind of capturing it internally. So if that's the case, it's the arpeggios would just have to be captured as audio, because the Montage itself, I know the motif, I believe, was that way. I'm not an expert on it, but I believe that the arpeggiators didn't transmit the MIDI data out of the instrument, but just internally. So, and if I'm completely have the wrong Montage, just let me know in the comments, and we'll see if we get to it as we circle back. Okay. So we have a question. Convert stereo file to mono. Seems not working for me in the project convert files. So something that's a little that could be missed is, let me just get another file in. It's a little longer. Okay, so a lot of people assume that you select the event, but try just selecting the track. And when you go here, you just say multi-channel to mono. I think I have something that makes it smaller, but make sure that you don't have the event selected, but just the particular track, because it's going to convert the track, but not the event. So try that. I think it's one thing that a lot of people do that's not so obvious. Okay. Just had my discussion jump way to the bottom, which it does once I hang out. Okay. All right, we have lots of great questions. Okay, just scrolling back to. Okay, so just reading through different comments and questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so we have a question: how to slice audio to MIDI parts and assign them to controller. The easiest way is to just do like what we did with Groove Agent. So if you didn't see that, I'll quickly revert this project. And there's also different slicing algorithms within different instruments like Alien as well. So if you come here, but we have Groove Agent SE. It comes with all the versions. So I drag over an audio file. And we put it onto an instrument pad. At that point, go to the under edit, go to slice, create slices, and now each of these are on their own MIDI notes. So if I wanted to, we'll just select this particular track, and as I just play from my MIDI controller, so that's a fast, easy way to do it. So, okay. Okay, so how to slice audio to MIDI. Okay, so a question in Cubase Elements, is it possible to use Antares Autotune plugins? Yeah, but one of the plugins that you could definitely run it, as a plugin, but one plugin that you may also want to check out is if you go to Inserts, I think this is in Elements, that if you go under Pitch Shift, is the Pitch Correct plugin as well, and here you can kind of set the key that you want. So if you say, okay, I'm in C major or, G major, at that point you could kind of set the key for different things. And that does kind of like a quick automatic pitch correction. It's quite effective. So, but you could definitely run, any VST plugin within Cubase Elements. Okay, just see a question. This may be more to the group. If anyone can offer advice on where to get started with Cubase 10.5, just got it and never worked with the DAW before and need beginner level understanding, thanks so much. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube tutorials, but try to, and there's some basic ones like, doing your first audio recording, doing your first MIDI recording, look for some of those, but, know that the program can do a tremendous amount, and just, and it's a lifetime of discovery in the program, and realize that, just figure out one specific task that you want to accomplish and learn that, and learn, if one piece of advice, if I could pass on, would be learning keyboard shortcuts. And that would, every time you do a function, see if you could learn the keyboard shortcut to do that. So that could really speed up your workflow. But, don't be overwhelmed. But, Cubase could do so much. But, just say, today I just want to do editing. I want to record and I want to do multiple passes and figure out this, and take one step at a time and try to learn one new thing every day. Learn 2 new keyboard shortcuts every day, and you'll be fast before you know it. But don't be intimidated just because it has everything, and Cubase is a great program. While it has so much, it's not necessarily hitting you in the face the whole time. So give that a try, and maybe other people could, share. And, you're doing a great thing by being on a Hangout and just kind of watching how other people work and different workflows, and being exposed to those is really helpful too. Okay, so it says, "Hi Greg, is there any way to load Roland CD-ROMs into Cubase 10.5?" Most of the CD-ROMs, it really depends on what they are. Sometimes I know people that have like older sample libraries, like was it the S7600 sampler, and I think if we have our instruments like Hallian, Hallian can import, if you get the Hallian sampler, Hallian can still import a tremendous amount of different third-party content. And what you would need to do is to just, mount the CD. And sometimes the CDs aren't readable by, either kind of proprietary formats, but you can import different sample libraries. Like I have a lot of the EMU library, the Kurzweil library. I have those files that I've imported into Hallian, but generally they're not, like a generic CD-ROM. So, but if it's depending on what data is on it, but if it's like the old Roland samplers, that may be something that you could import into directly into Hallian and play back those sounds. Okay. Okay, so just reading through different comments. Thank you for all the great questions. Okay, so I see a question. I think this was emailed in earlier as well. It says, "I have a problem with my MIDI keyboard in Cubase 10. When I use a VST instrument, for example, Groove Agent, I have no sound." A couple of things to check. And when you say Groove Agent, there's one thing that may not be so obvious. So let's say if I have when I do this, I have an actual, Groove Agent sound loaded up here, and I could just use my MIDI controller and trigger the samples as expected. One is to make sure that when you have Groove Agent loaded, that you click on the actual sounds to make sure that the instrument is sounding. So sometimes people load up Groove Agent and not load up any sounds, and if there's no samples or sounds for it to trigger, then you won't hear anything. Make sure that when you have a MIDI activity light here in the transport in the lower right zone, so as you hit a MIDI message from your controller, make sure that is seeing MIDI data coming in. If you don't see MIDI activity there, that would lead to be that the controller is not seeing virtual instruments. But I think in your email you said that you could do it outside of running like Groove Agent standalone, that it works. What a lot of people do also is load up a general MIDI drum map. So now what can happen is, as you're doing a general MIDI drum map, and we go to edit the drum map. So let's just say, and I go into the drum editor for that. That within the general MIDI drum map, and this is the one that gets a lot of people, they load that up, and by a general MIDI map, the drums will be on MIDI channel 10. So make sure that this MIDI channel, you may have to change this to the MIDI channel that Groove Agent is on. So those are some things to try. So make sure you have MIDI communication there, that you see the MIDI interface. If you go to your studio setup and go to your MIDI port setup, that your MIDI interface is listed there. Make sure you have sounds loaded up, and if that still seems like it's all working as expected and you're hearing sounds, check your MIDI channel if you're using a drum map, and make sure that's not being rerouted to a channel that doesn't have where Groove Agent isn't set to. Okay, so we'll go on. Okay, so just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions again. And if you have learned a couple tips and tricks, feel free to like the video and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. How can you mix the kick, snare, toms, etc. in a track in Groove Agent? So I'll just load up project here. We have some Groove Agent going on. Okay, so I'll just set my master time here to bars and beats. So just kind of give you an idea, you know, within Groove Agent, some of the things that's cool is okay, I'll just kind of jump here where drums will kick in just a little bit. So here I have my kick and snare, all come from Groove Agent. I have just a little bit of percussion coming from the percussion agent. But really all you need to do is you go to the mixer and click on agent. And here you can say I want my kick to be louder. I want it more reverb on my snare. And I could also select a particular channel. And if you wanted to EQ or add compression, tape saturation, or even an envelope shaper. So every time you select a different source with like the acoustic agent, you'll have different drums, a full mixer. And one of the cool things with the acoustic agent, you could come here and just right click and you could export the mixer and the effects channels to all these settings into Cubase channels. Now, if it's using a beat agent, that could be slightly different. So if you have a beat agent and I wanted to load a kit with patterns, so if I go to my pattern pad, so say I'll just mute these. So we could have, once we go to a beat agent and you go to the mixer here, you could have, you know, multiple outputs. So you could just kind of select. So if we go to edit, you know, you could have your aux sends here. So let's say if I wanted a reverb and maybe a delay, I could now come here and just kind of do different effect sends. And then when I go to my agent itself, we'll say, so we'll select this and we'll go to our instrument. So we could set the volume here, and each pad we can choose to set it to, you know, different outputs. So we could route it to, you know, 1 of 32 stereo outputs for each pad. And if we go to like the amplifier section, so let's say if I'm just playing, so let's say if I just want to put reverb and we go to the amplifier, I could say let's add more aux send 1. And you could just add more of the effects. So this way, this is where you could access your auxiliary sends, but you could route these just by going to the main area, and then you could click it and have these go to, again, one of 32 stereo outs. So there could be different approaches depending on the agent. So when we come here to the mixer, we'll see more for the acoustic agents, more of an analog console. And then when we go more for the beat agent, more kind of like an MPC paradigm, where you get to have different effects and EQs and routing capabilities. And if you wanted to route to physical outputs in the acoustic agent, again, we could just say, okay, let's go to the agent, to the mixer, and this is the drop down where you could route to 32 stereo outs. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. Okay. Okay, is it possible to add a button to switch metering position between input and post panner? The button could possibly give you feedback on what the metering position is active. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look. So if we're playing back our metering, you could just right click on a fader, and then you have global meter settings. And here we could choose to meter the input. Just right click there. So I can see my input channel. And you can do post fader, post panner. So again, just kind of right click in the meters themselves. Scroll down, you'll see global meter settings. And at this point, you could hold the peaks or hold forever, or just simply change your meter position there. Okay, moving on. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay. Okay, so I see a comment on the Apache. Says, thanks, man. I have Elements. I'm struggling to find Apache. You may want to just check on the online like comparison chart to see, but I think it's going to be in there. But it could be maybe not included with Elements, but you could look on the Steinberg website. All right, so see a comment. Hi, Greg. Thank you for all your tutorials. I'm glad they've been happy. I'm glad they've been helpful. Thanks for the comment. Okay. Okay, says add Aviom AN16 to Cubase for individual track monitoring in the studio. So I'm not sure if this is a question or maybe a comment on a previous thing, but a lot of times you could do a tremendous amount without having to have like an Aviom system, using kind of the built-in Q mixes of Cubase. Okay, question. How can I make my voice sound more echo or not echo to have that ghostly effect, especially stretching the voice without making it out of tune to beat? There's a lot of, we'll choose to destroy this song with a really nice voice here, but we'll give you an idea of some of the different echo stuff that you could do. There's a really kind of wicked echo that was released in 10.5 called the multi-tap delay. So I'll just go to my sends here. So we'll just make that completely dry. And I'll just right click in there, add an effect send, and let's make it into multi-tap delay. And I'll just go ahead and solo that again.
Where do I go from here?
So, I mean, you could start playing around different presets if you wanted to. Now let's go.
The very last one to leave. I plan on loving you forever. Didn't you see?
So what you could do with this echo that's kind of a bit unique is one is you could have multiple taps. You could have an 8-tap echo, and as you start kind of working with it, you know, and then you could say, I want there's different characters for delays. So if you wanted to, you know, do automatic, you know, different sample rates if you wanted to be more vintage digital or tape based delay, you could do that. Each of the delays can be tempo sync. So if you say, okay, I want this to be, you know, a quarter note delay instead. And if you wanted to, you could have different effects on the echoes. You could have 6 different effects. Now, when you get into the taps, we could have these different kind of rhythmic taps, and each tap could have its own plug-in setting. So you could say the second tap, I want a delay, but I want the delay, I want a reverb off in this tap, but on in this one, and I want it to take different scenarios. So, you know, play around. If you have the Cubase Pro 10.5, definitely check out the multi-tap delay. It's probably the most powerful delay I've ever seen in, you know, software or hardware. So check that out. And I think that'll get you where you want to be. Okay, so I see a question, when will you optimize CPU management? You know, there's lots of optimizations in Cubase for CPU management. You know, with the version 10, they did a rather significant change for more than 14 cores. A lot of times when you're working with different plugins, many plugins, depending on how they're instantiated in a program, may not be or may not split across different cores. So, you know, but I've seen, you know, ridiculous templates of, you know, 3,000 plus tracks for a lot of composer clients that we have. So, and, you know, while they always want to run 4,000, you know, they could do a tremendous amount. So, you know, make sure that, you know, all of your different components are optimized, you know, even stuff like, you know, having a Wi-Fi on the system active, sometimes that could screw things up, or, you know, video drivers, you know, so there's lots of issues that could be caused by NVIDIA that can, you know, hamper CPU performance. So really kind of check that out. So, okay, so I just see a question, why am I using 10.02 instead of Cubase 10.5? My project is probably just says Cubase 10.02, so I'm just saying, just make sure. Okay, I just saw someone says that they couldn't hear any audio, so I just checked that, so it seems like everyone could hear. Okay, if not, just let me know, but okay. So that's why I'm not, I'm using 10.5, 0.12, the latest version. Okay, so I see, please fix line tool, parabola sign, not musical on changed tempo. So if you know, we'll take a quick look. So if you're not familiar with that, you know, it's when we kind of draw in different things, you know, one thing to be aware of. So let's say if I, you know, wanted to draw in, I'll just kind of zoom in a little bit. Let's say it was for a synth part or filters. So if I wanted to come here, you know, you could just have your, so if you wanted to draw in parabolas, you know, that's quite easy to do. And if you, let's say if you have like, you know, sine waves, you know, one thing that a lot of people don't know is as you start to draw in, I think if you hold down the shift key, you could just have the frequency automatically adjust, you know, to do that. So if you don't like that, just, you know, I can make it really long for different amplitudes, or you could, make it very narrow and just kind of draw it in. And if you wanted to do this more regularly, consider using a plugin like the on a MIDI track, something like under the MIDI inserts, where you could just simply have the auto LFO plugin, and that way you could have different waveforms and different stuff that's automatable and tempo syncable as well. But make sure that you hold down the shift key. A lot of people miss that option where you can say, okay, I want it to be, more like every 2 beats, or I want it to be, you could change the frequency of that. So I'm not sure if anything is broken with that. It's just the drawing tool, and you pick the frequency that you draw it in. Okay. Okay, so it says, "Hi, Greg. I hope you're doing well and staying healthy. Could you please let me know how I can make automation to create sound?" Okay, of round robins. Okay, so I think we covered that already. Yeah, and sometimes if you ask the same question over and over again, we'll get to it when we get to it. So asking the same question 4 or 5 times, is can kind of clog up the bandwidth of the comments in the field. So just kind of ask your question. We'll get to them as many as we can. Okay. So question, how to mix like a pro? It's always years of experience, making, like some people think I know Cubase really well. It's just I've made more mistakes, earlier than other people. So it's a lifetime of study, and, it's like being a great guitar player. You think you will get to a certain level that you'll be really good, and then once you're at that level, you realize that you're not. And some of my, I get to work with some of the best mixing people in the world, and and they're all incredibly humble and always learning. So there's not a magic button. Just there's things you could do to make sure. I see some things I see that people do that are working against them. One is like using too many plugins, and sometimes making sure your room is treated that you're mixing in. And I know like Elliot Shiner, who's one of probably the greatest mix engineers ever. He mixes incredibly quiet, and that totally works for him. Or he really has to kind of actively listen, almost like a whisper. And he spends most of his time mixing at very, very quiet levels. So I wish I could give a magic answer to how to mix like a pro, but just make lots of mistakes, and then do it many times and learn and try to be better every single time. Okay. I see a comment. I would like the sun knocking on the door during live streaming effect if possible. Yeah. So I think we have enough samples for people to work with. So, but he's being pretty good. So, okay. Let's go on. He's been kind of cooped up at the house for almost a month now. Okay. Okay, so I see someone that wasn't having audio, got their audio working. That's good. It's with some of the older Hangout software, sometimes I could be doing a Hangout and the audio would just drop, and if I monitor the audio, then it would kind of feedback. So, and I go like 20 minutes before I realized that no one could hear me because the audio connection got dropped. So that's why I'm kind of nervous about that all times. But the new system seems to be working better. Okay. Okay. So I see, let's see, and I see a comment about and want some diatonic piano roll. So one thing that people often miss is, let's say if we have our song here and I have a chord track set up. So let's say here it looks like I'm in the key of C. And if I go to my piano part, And if you wanted to, if you see like the little color icon here, we could choose to colorize by the chord track. So when you see green notes that are in the chord, blue notes that are within the scale, and if you have a red note color-wise, that's going to be out of the key and out of the scale and out of the chord. So, check out your different coloring options. And that way you could know pretty instantly if your note is out of key. So if that's what you want to do. So. Okay, so I see comment. I'll try not to talk over the music examples. All right. Okay, so we have a question: how to record MIDI to audio? There's a number of ways of doing this. If you wanted to record it, one way of transferring MIDI to audio is, just selecting. Let's say I have these parts here that I wanted to turn. These are MIDI parts, and I wanted to turn them into audio. I could go to my edit menu and just choose render in place. All right. And not, maybe I have something else selected. Let me just revert this quickly. Okay, so let's say if I have multiple parts selected, a really easy way to turn it into MIDI is just to come over here and just say, okay, I want to render in place. And there's different settings that you could have. So if you wanted to take multiple parts, you could do it as one event, as block events. We could make it dry, including channel settings, or if you wanted to include sends, if you wanted to add the master effects, what you wanted, if you wanted to add a custom name, but you could just select like multiple events. And I see people often asking for, I want to freeze multiple tracks. And it's really much easier, I think, to just do a render in place for multiple parts. So you could choose to mute, or if you want to keep the source track, so I could just choose to mute the tracks and come right there, and this will automatically render. It will take the audio, place it directly below the event. And as we come here, we can see that the MIDI is muted. And you could also have it by track selection. And if you have it by tracks, the cool thing about that is, let's say I want to take these two tracks. You get some additional options if you select the event or the track. So when you go into your render settings under edit, so you can do render in place, and you could also just choose to automatically disable the source track. So if you have like a large sample library, that could disable the instrument, or you could just choose to remove the source track. So if I say remove the source tracks, it'll go through and render the files. And what we'll see is the original MIDI tracks can be erased and removed entirely. So if you wanted to just bounce everything very quickly. So once all the parts are rendered, then it's just replaced with audio events just like that. So that's, I think the render in place is a real easy way to kind of work with, turning the MIDI into audio. But if you wanted to actually record MIDI and audio simultaneously, let's say another method that you could do. So come here, I'll start with like a Groove Agent. Okay, so I will just have, all right, and I could add a group track, and we'll make it a stereo group. And then I'll add a stereo audio track. Okay, so I could take the output of Groove Agent, and what we could do is say, okay, instead of going to the stereo out, I'm going to send this to the group. So now when I play back my sounds, I see that the signal will go into Groove Agent, into the group, and then for my audio track, I could set its input from the group. So make sure I did that right. And then that way you could just simply record both audio and MIDI simultaneously. Just so here's my group as the input. So I'll place both the MIDI tracks and the audio tracks in record. So the audio is going to go out of Groove Agent into the group, out of the group into the audio track. So now I hit record. And then we'll stop. And as we do that, we could have both the audio and MIDI recorded simultaneously. So that's really helpful if someone comes over the keyboard and you want the MIDI parts and you want to capture the sound at the same time, we could do that. And if you wanted to kind of go on with the next question, let's say if I have my kick going out of, so I come to my mixer, I can say I want the kick going out of output 2, my snare going out of output 3. So let's say if I come here, so, and we could kind of do the same thing. So we could set up that one particular, I'll add another group channel. Say we'll add 2 groups. And let's add another audio track. So now I could say this particular channel, say my kick, is I want to send this output directly to, let's just go to our full screen mixer here really quick. So I hit the kick. Okay, so in its routing, I want this to go to group 2 and my snare. want this to go to group 3. And let's say for audio 2 and 3, it's input from group 2. And you could save this all as kind of like a template or preset, this routing configuration. So now when I do this all correctly, I can come here. I'll just come here and I could record. I'll put that one in record. So but I probably have some of the, so that's how you could do it. So you could route each individual out to different groups and then take those group inputs and be all set and record multiple outputs in real time if you wanted to. Okay. Okay, reading through different questions here. Okay, so hi Greg, it's any possibility of multi-touch supporting another so I know that some of the developers are looking into it. A lot of times they want to make sure that all the different components are native to both operating systems and the Mac. You know, even though they do wonderful things with touchscreens on iOS, it hasn't really carried over into Mac OS. So, but I keep asking for it, and I'll mention it again. Okay, so, and I see, how can I open up the plugins always in the screen where the mix console is placed? I have 3 screens, one for the mix console. I could play around with that. I only have 1 screen currently set up, so I can't really come up with a way. So you may be able to just save, you know, one thing to try is just to, you know, try saving workspaces. So if you wanted to, you know, try adding a workspace, that may help with that. But I could hook up some additional monitors and play around with it if you want to email me back at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, so it says, longtime Cubase user here. Any ideas how to use Cubase to jam with band like one would do with Ableton Live? So, you know, there's a number of different ways of approaching it. I'm not that familiar with Ableton Live, but what I see a lot of people do for live performance is, you know, they'll just, you know, easily kind of come over here and, you know, use arranger tracks. So I know a lot of people, you know, will just have different arranger tracks set up. So if we wanted to come here, we'll add an arranger track. And if people are doing kind of sets, you could just kind of, you know, come here and have different songs in your set or different parts. So you can say, this is my verse, a chorus, a bridge, a solo. And then you could take these and kind of rearrange them live. So I know lots of people that have their entire show in one project, and then each song is one arranger part, and they could, you know, easily switch the set order, and then you could put these into different modes where it'll jump at the end or jump every 4 bars when you send it, and you can send MIDI messages to have it loop, you know, particular section. So there's a lot of people that do that as well. So you know, experiment with the arranger track. Okay, we see, hi Greg from Toronto. Could you give us a brief primer on Groove Agent SE? Okay, so quickly, I know we've kind of done a lot of stuff with Groove Agent SE kind of throughout the Hangout. So some other things that may not be as obvious, you know. So you can think of it as like 2 different drum machines. One will be working primarily as like an acoustic virtual drummer, and the other will be more of like a beatbox MPC paradigm. So we'll just kind of come here and we'll look at it. Show you a little bit. So if you wanted to, and it really depends on what kit you load up. So some will be, just when we look at like a beat agent kit, you can drag and drop samples very easily to different pads. You have pattern pads and instrument pads. So if you wanted to, change the sound of one of the elements, you could do that. If you wanted to change pitch, we could adjust our volume. So let's say if I have like a particular pattern going on here, so I'll just go to the patterns, and this will automatically kind of just sync with different settings that you want. So if you wanted to kind of take, different patterns as well. So let's say if I wanted to go to my instruments, some are cool things that you could do. So once I'm here, we could just say some neat things that a lot of people miss when we're on an instrument is, if I wanted to do like a pitch envelope, you could go to the pitch tab here and you could just say, so you could do that. Or if you wanted to just select, let's say, just one little percussion element here, you could just, very easily, let's say, take a different sound. You could also just kind of randomize the pitch. So if I just want to take like that hand clap sound, I could go to the pitch and just kind of randomize the pitch. And you could also run filters on each individual pad or each individual or globally. So if you wanted to go to the filter section, you could have different filters. Hang on just one second. My son's knocking. All right, apologize for that. All right. So those are some of the cool things that you could do with that, being able to drag and drop samples into the beat agent. So if I have a number of different, let's say a folder of different snare drums that I wanted to put in, I could just select all the snares and drag them directly to, onto a single pad. If I wanted to, we could do round robins, as we discussed before. We could choose to also just, if you wanted to trigger these by velocity or round robin, or just, random, we could do that. Or if you just want to layer all 8 samples, you could do that as well. When we get into more of the acoustic agent side, some of the things that are unique, we saw some of the mixing capabilities. But when we look at the acoustic agent itself, when we go to our patterns, we'll see kind of more of a real drum kit. And you could select your snare, add more room, tune it. So you want more piccolo snare. But this has kind of a unique pattern mode as well. So I could come here and we have this XY axis. So if I wanted the pattern to be more complex or to adjust the dynamics, and you could kind of set these up by right-clicking and learning to CC. So if I just wanted to come back and we'll play, I'll adjust the complexity. Or the dynamics. There's also different drum fills. So I could say every 4 bars, play one of the random drum fills. Or do a halftime. So I'll give you a bit of an idea of some of the stuff that you could do with Groove Agent SE. All right, so see, Comment Groove Agent has a bug about volume fader when creating MIDI track on Groove Agent. Playback with up and down the fader. So if I want to, we'll see if we can. So I'll just assign quickly a MIDI track. Do new project. I'll just check this really quickly. Thanks for everyone's patience. Sorry for interruptions with my son, but I'm sure many people that have kids at home can have similar issues and can relate. Okay, so I'll just do I'll do a MIDI rack. And I'll remove this first one. So this is the MIDI volume for the fader. And then this is the output of the instrument volume. So maybe if you could specify what the bug is that you see. So just let me know. Okay, so you see, hi Greg, how can I center my Groove Agent hi-hats? They're always panned to the left. So a lot of times when we come here, let's say if we go into our mixer, so there's a pan control here on the mixer. So that's how you could pan individual components. So if you wanted to take the snare, pan it to the right or the left. So you could use it in the internal mixer. Okay, so I see a question. Is there a quantized plugin that will allow a song to feel tight in areas and somewhat more loose in others, looking for a feel that causes a song to sound both produced yet organic? Play around with there's a MIDI quantizer plugin that's very handy. So if you go to under like a MIDI insert, and you'll see quantizer. And here you could adjust the swing feel, and that's completely automatable as well. So check out like on MIDI tracks, just going to the quantizer plugin, maybe like during the verse or the chorus, you may want to adjust the amount of swing. And so we could do that. Okay. Going on. Okay, can you demonstrate how to use audio warping features to fix timing issues from being slightly ahead or behind the beat? So if I have a drum loop in, so if you have different parts, so we go into our sample editor. So double click on the audio file. You want to go to the audio warp and probably just go to free warp. And once you do that, we kind of see the grid appear. And if you wanted to just, you could place like an anchor point before, and now you could, or if you wanted to place even like, I don't want this to be affected, but this was a little late or early, you could just simply adjust the position and kind of see the grid. So you can say, I want that to stay there, but I want to move this part earlier. So those are some of the things you could do to kind of fix timing problems. If something is a little ahead or behind a beat, just simply select it with a warp marker, and make sure that you may have to set a kind of an anchor before and after, depending upon a part. Okay. So I see a question, we can make the fill automatically in Groove Agent. Yeah, so once you have Groove Agent open as one of the pattern pads, you can, so I will select this and we'll go back to the instrument itself. So go to the patterns, and then we can say every 4 measures, do a fill. So depending upon what the fills are. So most of the acoustic agents will have an intro, 2 intros, 2 endings, and 4 fills to work between. Okay, so I see a question, how to record the MIDI files to audio. So we kind of covered that with a little earlier. So question, how does Prologue work on vocals? How can I use it? So Prologue is a synthesizer instrument. So you can't really run vocals into it. So we want to come here, we'll just take a look at it. So it's kind of a precursor to Retrolog, which is kind of a monster synth, but Prologue is just a synthesizer, so it doesn't have an audio input, so it doesn't really work for vocals, but it's a synthesizer, so it's a different sound source. See, comment looks like UAD Luna got Cubase going live now. That's awesome. We've been doing these hangouts for 4 or 5 years, so so we were doing it for a long time. All right. Okay, so you see question, how to make falls note with sax or trumpet and a slide bass note. You could do this, a lot of times just with pitch bend. One of the things that's unique to like VST 3.5 instruments, let me see if I have the project here, is that you have note expression, and this is really kind of a precursor to MIDI 2.0. So let me see if I have the project. So, and what this is going to allow you to do is to have, we've done this for 8 years or so, is to have a, independent controllers for different notes. So if we have like a brass thing here, because how a brass section would play versus a keyboard player would play. Let's go ahead and listen to this particular phrase. So that's often how like a keyboard player may play. But one of the things that we could do is go into note expression. So I could say I want to go to tuning. So I could select that particular parameter and say, okay, on this particular note, I just want to double click, and we can get a little editor directly within the note itself. So I could draw in tuning just on that particular note. So if I wanted to come here, or if I wanted different volume controls, I could come here and just say, okay, let's just draw in a separate volume for each note within a chord as well. And so when I do this, you could just really, so just playing around with like pitch bend a lot can make a big difference to make MIDI more expressive. But with the VST 3.5 instrument like Pad Shop or Hallian, you could do stuff like that to make it more expressive. Okay, so seeing a question. So is there a stereo panning mode in Elements 10, please? I'll show you where to look. But if we have a stereo audio track, a lot of times when we see our panning, we see kind of a different mode, and I'm not sure if this is in Elements, but if you click to the right here, at least I know in the Cubase Pro, you could have a stereo combined panner, and this would allow you to, I want this to be very narrow, I want it to be left, right, so you can move up and down for the width, and you can move it left, right, and you could even kind of reverse it if you keep going above kind of where it's minimal, and then you could reverse the panning just like that. So check that if that works in Elements. I don't work with Elements all the time, but that's where to look to see if you have that capability. Okay, so I see a comment, audio dropout solution. If you're having audio dropouts, the one thing to try, is, going into your studio setup, and it could be indicative of, maybe, like sometimes it's people have a bad memory chip, but, the first thing I would try if you're having kind of audio dropouts is to go into your studio setup and increase the buffer size. And there's a lot of people that are kind of confused with buffers, and sometimes people say, "Oh, when I run a lower buffer, there's less latency and it's better for my system." But it also makes the computer work much harder. So a lot of people may track at lower latencies, and as they start mixing and adding more and more instruments, they may kind of raise the buffer accordingly. So try raising your buffer size. That would be the first thing I would do if you haven't done that yet. Okay. How to simply or easily create GM or SM standard MIDI file from project with VSTi instrument to play properly on any GM MIDI sound source. Thanks. So, when you have to make sure like your MIDI files are going to be working and compatible with other general MIDI sources, if we start off with like an instrument rack, you'll have an entire GM bank inside of like Halion Sonic SE. So go to your synths, and as you go to use your different sounds, so let's say, okay, I wanted a piano, so I'll just let's say I'll just we'll come here, think. Okay. And when you come, you could just go to kind of the, I think the HSSE, and here you can see all your different GM patches. So if you're using that, you could just kind of, drag and drop. And if you wanted to, access, your different general MIDI patches from here, but, using your general MIDI patches and then just simply exporting that will make sure that, someone who's playing back your standard MIDI file with a GM device, that it will carry over. So, just try going to the Halion Sonic SE basics and use that as your sounds. And that's kind of like your general MIDI bank. All of your general MIDI patches can be in there. So I would use those. And then just simply export, and you could include, when you do your export MIDI file, you'll have different options that can be accessed directly from the preferences. So we go to MIDI file, and at that point, you can export options. You could, export inserts, sends, program changes, automation, the locator range, so different count bases as well. So. Okay. Hey, anyone know why my Cubase Pro 10.512 suddenly started to check content licenses on every startup? This is very irritating, as it takes almost 2 minutes. I've tried trashing preferences. Trashing the preferences will continue to make it do that. So make sure if it's not missing any content. It will kind of often check content, but I haven't had it go for like 2 minutes unless it's missing something. So, and a lot of times it could be like a third, like if you have content on a different drive, that may be a factor as well. So sometimes people put it on a slower external USB drive, that could slow things down, but so check if you've done that, and also, update the e-licenser program. So, and just do the maintenance on the e-licenser, and that could probably help as well. Okay. Okay, so I see, how can I add an effects like a volume slide on a single MIDI note in Key Editor? I'm trying an expression map, but it doesn't seem to apply the effect. Just like we showed before with the note expression, like what we did with the brass, I think that will do the trick. The expression maps will be more for switching different articulations available in the sample library, and not necessarily for kind of individual control of those notes for more expressive purposes. So you have note expression and expression maps, so it could be a little confusing. Okay. Okay, so it says, I'm using these products on a trial basis right now, and I'm having issues resizing my plugin and VST windows. Is there no way to change the size of your VST windows? It really depends upon the plugin and how it's set up. So some plugins can be resized. Others are kind of a fixed size. Make sure also, if you're doing like a high DPI, we often get the message on Mac, but to set your scaling, especially on Windows, and some plugins scale correctly and some don't. There's a lot of plugins that aren't set up for high DPI usage. And a lot of companies are kind of transitioning. So, a lot of the plugins are kind of, and they get to be, there could be all sorts of different issues and resizing for, it's like all of a sudden parts of the plugin aren't visible if you resized. So there's a lot of implications in the design that users could run into. So, but if it seems like really small or really big, try checking the scaling if you have a high DPI resolution. So. Okay, just kind of going through. All right, we see Gant Kushner on the Hangout. Good to see Gant. All right, so let's go through. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to select multiple track and assign output in cascade mode? So let's go ahead and take a look. We'll do a new project. So we'll select, let's say 17 outputs, 17 tracks. I'll go into my audio connections, and so let's say if I have multiple outs, let me just add mono bus, change my count to 16. Okay, so when we go to like our mix console, let's say when we go to routing, I see these are all going to the same output. So I'm going to select all of the tracks that I want to affect. I will come here and just hold down the shift key, and I'll say mono out. Then it'll go mono out 2, mono out 3, 4, 5, 6. If you want them all to be sent to the same destination, you could do this by kind of what we call quick link mode, and that's Alt or Option plus Shift. So here they could all go to no bus, or holding down Shift and selecting the first one of the selected. They'll now kind of cascade and sequentially ripple out. So hold down the Shift key. Okay, so we have a question. What does pre and post fader mean in relation to, say, a reverb on an effects channel? What would the effect be switching between the two? All right, so we'll just jump back to this project quickly. So pre and post fader means is like, well, will the reverb send the amount of the send be affected by the fader level? So we'll play it here so you could kind of get a sense, I think, once you hear it. Okay, so I will go ahead and just solo.
What did you say?
And I'll go to my sends.
You wished it all
And I'll just go to my fader here.
I'm left here for
So you can see that we have, as we drop the fader, that we have this automatically kill the reverb. But if I right click here and we say move it to pre-fader, now as I adjust the fader, the reverb will stay the same regardless. That relationship will between the blend between the send and the fader will be the same regardless of where the fader is. So again, if it's set to post fader, and you can do this by right clicking. So no reverb, and that's affected by the fader level feeding into the send. And with pre-fader, it's not affected by the fader. So that's what it means. Okay. Okay, is it possible to add a new audio track with already an insert that you always use? You know, a lot of people, what they do is just simply say, you know, you could add a track, you know, people will save it as a track preset. And then when you go to, you could just say, you know, add track using track preset. And that track preset could have a favorite EQ or like tape saturation on it. So every time, you know, you could say, this is my default track, add, yeah, I guess I want to add track using my track preset and just kind of come right there. And that would add that track with your different effects on it for you. Okay. Do I know any high quality flute VST, like solo flute with a lot of velocity possibilities? You know, once you get into some of the orchestral libraries, you know, they're very good at that. So I'll just show you kind of, you know, if you're looking just for a flute sound, it may be overkill for what you want to do. But this is, if you're looking for the most realistic flute, that would probably be the way to go. So if I wanted to jump to, let's say, Iconica. And we'll do sections and players. And then we'll just go to woodwinds. So let's say our flute standard. So, and I'll just make this a little louder. So let me switch octaves on my controller. And if you wanted to check out some of the different articulations that are available, you know, you could. And if you wanted to, you know, switch to like a staccato or marcato, so you can see you have the different round robin options. And you can have different expression controls, so using the modulation wheel or other controllers. So, you know, it's, you know, if you're looking just for a high quality flute, it may be overkill, but you could definitely do that. So, you know, the Iconica is a monster orchestral library. Okay, reading through questions. Okay, so okay, I'm just gonna kind of, my timeline jumped, so let me just kind of work my way back. Okay, and then I'll get to some questions that were sent in. Okay, we have so many questions. All right, so I just quickly I see, is it possible to rule Groove Agent with a hardware like an Akai MPC-1? Yep, any MIDI controller, drum pads will work great with it. Okay, I see a question on like MIDI drums, how to split them into different tracks for different sounds. So let's say if I have a number of MIDI sources here, and let's say if I enter them in the drum editor, so I'll make this just a little bigger. Okay, so let's say I have, kick, snare, some different sounds here, and I wanted to split all of my MIDI into different tracks. If you go to the MIDI menu, we go to just select this and choose dissolve part, and then from there we could separate pitches. So then that way your kick, snare, hi-hat, your different sounds can automatically be created into different tracks easily. All right, so just kind of scrolling through. Okay. All right, so it says, hi, Greg, can input transform with chord track and scales handle polyphonic input other than block chords? Just reading that again. So I'm not sure if I understand the questions. Maybe, and I know it's probably going to go way at the bottom, but perhaps if you could reiterate the question somehow, that'd be helpful. Okay. Okay, so I'm seeing how to do a slur in saxophone. So we kind of showed that with the note expression. Okay, so I see a question. My Cubase color scheme went berserk just now. How to reset? So, if you go to the project, you'll see the project color setup. And here, you could, store different color sets if you wanted to, or save presets, or just kind of easily make your own. If you go to the presets here, you could kind of go back to default color codes if you wanted to. So that's how you could do it. Okay, so question. Thanks, Greg, for doing these. In audio recording, if I have staccato violin notes, is there a way to quick tips to quantize all the audio hit points? Quantize works well, but not always perfect. Let me see if I could find a file. I may have one in the project here that we could. I think I have little pits in this project. All right, so let's say we'll just listen to this.
The party, the big event, I was your
right, so if I turn on my... All right, so let's say we want these. So I would just go to hit points, make sure that the hit points are kind of set accordingly. So, and then, try, you could at this point create slices and then just quantize. And let me see what my quantized value was. So say if I wanted this to be to eighth notes, because they're kind of on off beats, then select the events and quantize. Versus what they were before. So this is a little bit off rhythmically. That's a little early. So definitely kind of improved the timing, but make sure like the hit point detection, you may have to manually add a hit point or two. Okay. So it says, I've seen Tim Henson from Polyphia use chord tracks to auto-tune guitar audio tracks almost like a vocoder. Any idea how that is accomplished? You can take any audio source once you have a chord track in here and have it, so it's, if we take this, we'll go to our chords and we could have audio tracks follow the chords and scale. So if I wanted to come here, just selecting this track, I can now have it follow directly the chords. So if we listen to it now, and let's say if I just change this chord, it's kind of designed for monophonic audio. So it may not be the best example, but I think that's what they're doing, is just taking the chord track and putting it in chords and then having the audio follow the chord track. Okay, just going through. Thanks everyone for great questions. I hope everyone's learning a tip or trick or two. Okay. Okay, let's just keep going through different questions. All right, I'm going to go touch on some of the questions that were sent in before I forget. Okay. So we had a question about exporting score not working. So if I wanted to, I'll just do our project as something a little more conventional MIDI wise. So let's give it a try here. And what this function allows you to do is to take the score and export it. So let's say if I wanted to take this score and I'll have it do an analysis of, I'll select all the notes here. And let's say I wanted to do like a lead sheet for someone. If I come here, we can pass this out. So let's say I have this as my score and I wanted to export this as a file that can be viewed without having any issues. So we'll just get to File, to Export, and Scores. This will be exported as a ASTC file, and I'll just save this to the project. So we'll call it April 10th hang. So we'll go ahead and save. And he was kind enough to send me a video, so we'll see if mine behaves. Okay, so here's the file, and we'll go ahead and open it up. So that looks pretty similar to what I had. So, if you want to send me, a file, you can email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. But if you want to email me a file, but that looks pretty similar to what I had in the page layout here. Um, so, so that looks kind of normal to me. And there's also another question when doing batch exports in Cubase that the different settings would remain ticked. So let's say if I did a batch export here and I had all my VST instruments checked, and then go to the batch export again, and even after exporting that they would still remain ticked. So it still will keep the selection. So it's it's probably not the end of the world to just have that to uncheck it. Okay, so a question: is there a way to set a default pre-gain volume, for example, -7 dB for instrument tracks? Because often the output signal of an instrument track is so loud that it starts clipping if I don't set a pre-gain knob to a lower level. So it would be great to be able to set a default volume beyond 0 dB, which will also apply to newly created projects in the future. I've never had a problem, and maybe other people could chime in about loading an instrument track, having it be too loud. So there isn't a way. I mean, you could have everything kind of stored in a template. And if you're not familiar with like the pre-gain, if we go to the mix console here and we look at particular tracks, so let's say let's just go to like my audio track here. That you have a pre-section where you could attenuate gain if necessary. I've never had that issue where just loading an instrument track, it's too loud. Could it be perhaps that you have other plugins like maybe compressors or expanders or a limiter further down the chain that's causing the problem? You could save it as kind of a track preset within a template or as you add, but I don't think that that's the true problem. So check to see if you have any other gain structure issues. But you could save it as a track preset, but that may not be the right solution, I would think. Okay, question. I'm using the HSO library, the Halion Symphonic Orchestra, which is part of the Absolute 4. So it's kind of a really, high quality, small, easy to use orchestral library, and want to create a similar effect as a bass drop or riser on a violin or any other sampled instrument, where the pitch of the note shifts down or up over time. If I do this just by drawing an angular line in the pitch shifting editor, the pitch is changed by slowing down a sample. Let's see. And the pitch is changed by slowing down the sample, making it faster. This is going to sound really awful if the instrument glides over 6 or 7 semitones. Is there a better way to do this? So I don't think that this would take into account. So let's say if I'll try to recreate this, but I think part of the sample playback engine, so I will just do a Halion Sonic SE here, and let's load from the HSO, and let's say a violin. Okay, and I'll just kind of draw in some notes here. And I'll just draw that up. Okay, I'll just record something in. Sorry about this. Just let me erase this. I'll just keep something rhythmically steady. So when we do this and I draw in pitch bend, it's not going, if you're just drawing in pitch bend data, I don't think it's going to change the length of the sample at all. It's just pitch bending the sample. So if I come here, it'll sound goofy, but it should have the same rhythmic. So it's the same rhythmic feel. So, part of using a sampler doesn't do that. So it's not going to change the default. It's not going to, change the length of the sample because of pitch bend. So, okay. So next question. It says, I love Cubase, Club Cubase Hangouts. I'm learning tons of new stuff. I have a question, suggestions about solo mute. Just scroll down. Is there a way to make solo or mute configurations in Cubase? Sometimes I want to solo specific channels, groups, and compare them to another set of solo channels groups. Is there a way to be able to access these solo and mute configurations by maybe menu commands and or commands like visibility configurations? I think if you run into a situation like this, you might be able to do something with, I was looking to see if we could do it with like channel snapshots, but it doesn't recall it may not recall the solo and mute status between different tracks. So if I wanted to jump to, let's say this project here, and I'll just play this. I think one of the things that you could do is kind of use a combination with direct outs. So I'll go to my full screen mixer, and we're going to activate our direct routing in the racks, so the upper right-hand corner. And I'll just kind of hide all my input channels. So let's say if I wanted to take, so we'll go to direct, and what we could do is just kind of add groups. So I'll add 2 stereo groups. And we'll just create them outside the folder. Okay, so now what I could do is just kind of switch. And let me just add. I'll add one more group channel, sorry. Okay, so I have group 2, group 3. All right, so what I want to do is maybe, and see if this helps to understand kind of what you want to do. So, so let's say if I want these to all go to group 1, and I'll just hold down my Alt and Shift key. And then I want it like maybe these tracks to go to group 2. All right, so if you wanted to, you could just, like, while it's playing, just say, you know, these could be routed to multiple destinations, and then you could say I wanted to, let me do this for all the selected channels here. And if you wanted to share between these two, I could select the, so this allows you to kind of route to multiple destinations. And if you wanted to, you could click to the right, to the left of that and just turn on direct routing summing. Then you could just solo the groups. So that way you could have, and I know it's a bit of a left-handed awkward approach, but you may want to try something like that, but I could pass that on as kind of a workflow thing in the mixer. That would be helpful. So try experimenting with the direct outs. Okay. Question. When I tried to open an old project containing a Groove Agent 1 track, Cubase 10.512 posted a warning saying that the plugin Groove Agent 1 could not be found for VST Synth 2. Surprisingly, it's listed in the Steinberg Library Manager. My operating system is Mac OS Catalina. I don't have Catalina, but I have Mojave. And I actually went and you could download the Groove Agent 1 instrument from the Steinberg website for, you know, like situations just like this. So, you know, and it's Groove Agent 1 was kind of the precursor to Groove Agent SE and Groove Agent. So if I go to my VST plugin manager and go to my instruments here, I can see Groove Agent 1, Groove Agent SE. Now, if you have a plugin collection that's active, you may not see it listed in the drum. So if I come here, if I had another plugin collection, I may not see that, or you may have to manually add it if you're using VST plugin collections. But if you go to the default mode, and what you have to do is basically within your Mac OS, and this is on a Mac, the question has come from, if you go to applications, and then go to Cubase. Let's say I go to Cubase 10.5 and I go to right click show package contents. And under contents, you'll see VST3. And what you need to do is go to the website and download Groove Agent 1 and drop it into that folder. And then you should be, then it'll become visible. And again, I haven't tried it with Catalina, but I think you'll be good, and other projects. Now, also one thing to be aware of is when Groove Agent 1 migrated to Groove Agent SE, all of the drum kits that were in Groove Agent 1 are you know, were transitioned over to Groove Agent SE as well. So, but you should be able to still kind of get it running. But I haven't personally tried it with Catalina yet. Okay, we have a question. I work with 4 24-inch monitors, and I have to set up the monitors every time I start the Mac. Workspaces doesn't remember all 4 of them. It'd be nice if they kept the last settings. How can I do that? And I think this is kind of tied into a Nuage system where the Nuage is kind of taking over control of, you know, like a couple of the monitors perhaps. So that might be a factor. I'll hook up a couple additional monitors that had a couple of questions and see if I could replicate that. But I've kind of always had my plugins kind of like when I've run my Nuage system, which is kind of a high-end Yamaha controller, always kind of work in as expected. So it could be a video card that's causing it, but I could play around with it. Another question, I work with Army Fireface 800. Can I route the software from Army total mix to the sound of the Mac right into Cubase. It should be working with loopback and total mix, but I can only route it with a cable, and I want to do it through software. And then it says, I know it's more of an RME question instead of a Cubase one. Yeah, I haven't worked with the RME hardware in 20 years, but I'm sure you might be able to do it. So next question. If I use rhythmic notation instead of regular notation to score for piano or guitar, I write a lot of arrangements for orchestras. Cubase crashes. What can I do to avoid crashes? So let's take a look and see if I think I'll show you a project where I had some rhythmic notation stuff. We'll take a look at. Okay. And if you're not familiar, this is kind of a cool feature. So I think like bass would be a good example here on this. So say if you're giving like a lead sheet to a musician. So what I did here was just to I'll just turn off rhythmic notation here, and for the score editor. So instead of like having to write the same parts over and over again ad nauseum, making it difficult for the musician to actually figure out when something is going, you can kind of give a rhythmic pattern here. And I'm just going to double click and select the rest of the notes and go to the scores menu and just choose rhythmic notation. So we could just say, we could indicate the rhythm that way, or we could choose to do show the bar repeat sign. So if you wanted that, where you can see kind of the different chord changes going along. So I'm not having any problems with that crashing. Just out of curiosity, if you're on, if you're on Mac, hold down, all right, so it says you're on Mac. So hold down Command Option Shift when you start Cubase the next time, and you'll get prompted, and try to temporarily disable the preferences and see if that changes the behavior. Sometimes when stuff like that happens, it could be like a preference from a version 9 years ago that kind of crept in that could cause issues. So try resetting the preferences. Okay. So, question, is it possible to lock the project duration so that the duration of the project is not lengthened every time we record on any track? Adjust the project duration in project setup so I can zoom in and out of the way that suits me, but when I start to record on any track, Cubase extends the duration of the project by 5 minutes. So let's give it a quick try. So it could be that the duration may be derived from the length of the audio file that's being recorded, but let's give it a shot. So I'll just add a few audio tracks. I'll just place these all into a folder. Okay, so let's check our project duration here. So I'm going to set it to 5 minutes. Okay, so I will do a quick recording. Let it go for a couple more seconds. All right, so we did 30 seconds of recording, and let's check our duration. So my project duration stayed the same, so it didn't seem to be affected. I'll do a little more recording, and we'll see if that is still the case. We'll do a 1 minute recording. Do like another 30 seconds, and we'll see if that makes a difference. All right, we'll just go just a little more. Recording my masterpiece of Tacit. Okay, stopped, and we'll look at our project duration. So mine hasn't changed with that. So I haven't heard of that changing for other people. And then I could still have my 5 minutes within my Zoom preserved. So maybe if you're recording more tracks, if you could let me know, that'd be helpful. Okay. So we have, is there a way to make the playing cursor stop when reaching the right locator? I often have reverb tails and fades and want to check the end with having to do the end of with having to do an audio export first. I end up moving the right locator to fine tune it, export audio, and repeat a bunch of times. Thank you. So I think if we have this set, let's say if I set my left and right locators here, so, and let me just add a marker track. Okay, so I'm just going to add a cycle marker here. Okay, and I think if we go to the key commands, we go to transport. And I think there's like a play until selection end. So if you have just or play until next marker. So if I just have this part selected here, and let's say my timeline is here. Let's see. No, that's not the keyboard shortcut I was thinking of. So let me just see what I programmed in. Sorry about that. I out-clevered myself with keyboard shortcuts. So, let's see, Command, Control, Option R. Okay. So now I come here, I could just say Command, Option R. And it will just stop right at the very end of the selection. So if you have, I assume you probably have an audio file that may be stopping there. If not, you could also just have it go to the next marker with a key command too. So again, you could just go to key commands under the edit menu and under transport, play until selection end or selection start or until next, or you could just do play till selection range as well. So if you wanted to, let's say if you have the range tool, I think that'll be just, no. So that's another option as well. Okay, so question, is there an easy way to slow down an entire playback of a song when recording in order to record technically challenging parts and automatically speed them up in playback? I think we could do that quite easily. Let me just jump back to another project. Okay, so we want to make sure that all the audio files kind of have like a tempo definition. So I want to just go into my media bay and we'll take a look, or not media bay, but my pool window rather, and we'll make sure, okay, all these are 100 beats a minute. Um, so that's what the tempo that they were recorded in. So if I wanted to now, I could place all these tracks into musical mode. So I'll select all these tracks, and from the timeline, we could put it into musical mode. And now, as I would, let's say and I need to do kind of a hard passage. I could go from 100 beats a minute to 80 beats a minute. Let's see, my bass doesn't sound like it's in musical mode. So I'll just, but put them all into musical mode. Yeah, I'll just put that in musical mode and now play the harder passage. And then just change the tempo after you record it at a slower tempo. Just change it back to, and now you want to be 140. So once it's been recorded, it'll be tempo stamped. And then select all the files, put it into musical mode, change the tempo down, record that. Even though it's recorded at a different tempo, it will retain its tempo stamp. And if it's in musical mode, it will automatically stretch to follow whatever the current tempo selection is. Okay. Okay. All right. We'll go back to our feed. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. I know we have a zillion questions. All right. So we'll see if we get some more in. Okay. So I had a question. What is the difference between 32-bit and 64-bit precision for processing? So we could see this in our studio setup. So once we come here, we can have options when we go to our VST audio system on processing precision. So you could have 32-bit floating point, which is what the engine has been for a long time, for over 20 years. And then we have 64-bit floating point. So many of the plugins, like I think all the Cubase plugins, can work in 64-bit precision. So that will be more precise in how it does calculations. Now, one of the big reasons that we went to 64-bit precision is because we started to capture 32-bit integer audio with some of our interfaces like the AXR4T and the AXR4U and the URC interfaces. Those have 32-bit converters. So to accommodate the 32-bit integer word file, like a 24-bit or 16-bit audio file, and to incorporate the processing capabilities of the effects, EQs, and automation, without sacrificing the integrity of the 32-bit integer. That's why we increased it up to 64-bit. So as you do fade-ins, as you do different calculations, the resolution is twice as much. It could be really subtle for some projects to hear. I mentioned on the last hangout that when it first came out, I sent just the same mix file. I exported one as a 32-bit floating and 32-bit floating precision, and one is 64-bit floating precision to a mastering engineer. He's a friend of mine, Greg Lukens, and if he's kind of incredibly highly regarded in audio and mastering circles. And I just said, tell me about these two files. And he's like, this one sounds better, but I'm not sure why. But it's a little better. And I did this multiple times with him, and he picked the same 64-bit resolution file. Now, as I mentioned in other hangouts, if you're doing something, like a thrash metal piece, it may not be as evident. But also, since a lot of the plugins are doing 64-bit precision, it could be a little more efficient actually. So that if the plugin doesn't support that level of resolution, it still runs as 32-bit resolution for the processing. But if it doesn't have to do that conversion, it could be a little more efficient. So it could be subtle, but it is there. Okay, so. Okay, so how can I create a master track and make the last touches to the piece? So once you have your project done and you like how it's sounding, you could set the left and right locators around the event. Come over here and just do an export audio mix down. We'll do a single file, my stereo out. We could create a new project if you wanted to, or we could just have that automatically, take that project into an audio track at the bottom of the project. So we'll just do a mix down of this file. So this is going to take all the automation, all the processing that we've done. And now we could take it into the mastering stage, which could be, a lot of people will master in a DAW. And some people are just horrified by that concept because the workflows can be very different. We have a program called Wavelab, which, you can check out the Essentials version, as part of a free download during the Stay Home collection. But that's really what a lot of people use for mastering. So it's a very popular and powerful mastering tool with, very comprehensive analysis and metering and, being able to deliver DVD-A, doing all your CD burning, all the additional metadata. So, Wavelab's really good. It's a particular well-suited task for that, but a lot of people will consider mastering. Okay, I want to make it a little louder, run it through a limiter, do some additional processing, and then, be able to distribute the file from that stage. So we'll take our final mix down here. We're almost done. It'll now import it directly into the project as a stereo wave file. And now if I wanted to treat this as a single entity and do additional processing, we could just come right over here. And of course I did it at the ridiculous tempo, but if I want to, do silly EQ stuff and run it through a compressor and kind of beef up sound. So some people will do this whole process in the master fader or treat it as a, your single entity of a file afterwards. So that's kind of some of the things you could do to create the master track and put the last touches on. Question in Dorco is for notation check. Is there a mode to play MIDI strictly as notated? All right, so we'll pop over to Dorco real quick, show you this. So when you're doing different Dorco stuff, one of the things that you could do in the editor, and Dorco is a bit unique in that, unlike many other notation programs, it actually treats a quarter note as a note that has like one beat. So let's say I just wanted to come here, and within the play mode in Dorco, we could, so we could see kind of a, almost like a MIDI editor here, but you have this distinction where you could see the lengths could be determined by the played durations or the notated duration. So if you needed in Dorco a note to be just like longer on the playback to trigger the sample, you could do that and not have it affect the actual notated length on it. So, all right, so we'll move on. Okay. Okay, so let me exit out Dorco really quickly here. I think we'll be jumping back into Cubase. Probably next question will, of course, be a Dorco question. And you could always check out like John Barron, one of my colleagues. He does great hangouts on Dorco as well called Discover Dorco. So check those out. Okay, so how do I get my customized plugin manager folder set up from Cubase 8.5 to show up in Cubase 10? Folders are missing and are not showing up correctly. I want to say that the plugin manager wasn't available in Cubase 8.5. I want to say that was kind of a Cubase 9.5 was when that was introduced. So it could be a different setup that may not transfer over. So you may have to recreate it, and also be aware that some of the plugins from 8.5 in Cubase 10, if you're running 32-bit plugins, they may not be, they're not going to be bridged automatically. You can buy a third-party bridging solution, or just, we highly recommend going to 64-bit whenever possible. But check out your plugin manager here and see if your plugins are here. But you could create, I'm pretty sure that this wasn't in 8.5, but I could be mistaken. If it was, the plugin manager was in 8.5, you can, and I think 8.5 was the first instance where we had the profile manager. So you could try saving it as a profile manager, and I believe the plugin collections are carried over in the profile manager. So save it in 8.5 and then see if you could import the profile into 10. But I'm pretty sure that the profile manager changed in 9.5. Okay. Moving on. Okay, Cubase AI 10.5. When I try to create a track for a virtual instrument from Hallian SE, I have to load each preset to the left area for me to hear how it sounds. Hang on, my son is knocking. All right, my time is up according to my son, so I'll get a couple more questions in. So Cubase AI 10.5, when I try to create a track for a virtual instrument from Hallian SE, I have to load each preset to the left area for me to hear how it sounds. What you could do is just kind of so let's say, you start off with your VST instrument, and let's say, I have Hallian Sonic, you said SE, so I'll come here and I'll just drag Hallian Sonic SE out here. So you see this little icon here. This will open up the instrument. And if you wanted to quickly audition different sounds, so let's say, okay, I'll go to my Hallian Sonic SE Basic. I could drag that over and then I could play. So let me just unsolo. So I could play. And then if I just, arrow down, so once this is the active window, if you wanted to quickly look between different sounds, hit enter. And then you could play, let me just arm that track for record. I think it's this one. So I could just, again, if I keep this area of window in focus, say I want this sound. So arrow down to the key you want, hit enter, and that will load up the sound. So that's an easy way to kind of audition sounds without having to necessarily always do it from the inspector. Okay, so going through a couple more questions here. Okay. Okay, it says, hey, Greg, I have a problem with the drum map. Sometimes when I press Alt to duplicate an event, it brings the drum tool and erases the event. Why is that? It could be when you press the Alt key. So if I, let's say if I want to come here and I'll look at this in the drum editor. So say if I did these particular notes, and we'll zoom in a little bit here. So now when I select these, try after you try selecting the Alt key, not before, but after you start dragging. So select them, move, and before you release, hold down the Alt key and press. So it's just a matter of when you hit the Alt key. So start moving it, then hold down the Alt key. So, okay, so it says, hi, Greg, I'm glad to join again. Thank you so much for the last session. I'm glad you found it helpful. Okay, so when I move a groove over as a track, why does Groove Agent create one track for a preset and then adds each of the instrument channels? Okay, I'm not sure where the groove, if it's MIDI or audio. So, okay, what is ASIO Guard? Do I have to turn it on? What ASIO Guard allows you to do is, we realize that not every, it's kind of a, again, we talked a little earlier about dealing with latency. So when we go to like your studio setup and as different tracks, as projects grow, you may have to increase the latency. What ASIO Guard allows you to do is to run a lower latency on the tracks that you're recording, and then the other tracks will actually be running at a higher multiple of that buffer. So it allows you to not have the highest, you can have lower latency on the tracks that you need a lower latency on, and everything else will just kind of be running at a higher, easier to use buffer. So that's what the ASIO Guard does. So if you are doing a lot of different instruments, that could be very helpful. But so you don't have to have it on, but it could really help with a lot of CPU resources on larger projects. Okay, it says, hello, Greg. In project settings, when I set display format to seconds and apply display time offset, Cubase still uses frames for this offset and not milliseconds. Is it okay? So let's go ahead and give it a try. So let's say I just set my primary time format to seconds here. And so let's say now when I come here to my project setup, okay, and let's say if I set it to bars and beats, okay. I think it's okay. I think that the display time offset, so I think you're okay, but it might be, check to make sure that you have, your master timeline format set how you want it to. Okay. Okay, question, is there a more subtle version of an auto-tune equivalent in Cubase that can align to a specific note without sounding like a machine controlling the pitch, like a slight swing? If you're doing, if you have Cubase Pro, the Very audio is hard to beat with any tuning tool. And that you can, work very carefully with transitions, and graphically edit. If you're doing other, if you want it to be just kind of like put something on and make it work, that's where if you go to the pitch shift and choose octave, the pitch correct plugin, you could set the, what key, or if you want it to be chromatic, and the speed adjustment that could be to make it a little more subtle. So those are a couple different ways. Is there a short way to edit the ranges of MIDI data so that it fits into each scale while shortening or lengthening the data relative to the closest scale? So let's take we'll just say if I have, like a beautiful score here. Okay. I'm such a great composer. All right. And if I wanted this to, all be kind of within one scale, you could just come over here again to like the logical editor. So we go MIDI to logical editor, and we can say type is equal to note, and then we can say value 1. I want it to set to or transpose to scale. So I can say I want this all to be in D major, and then I could just transform those notes and have it all be, so if we select those notes and I say, let's make it G major, I could apply. So if we undo, you can see that that would automatically just kind of change the particular notes around. So that's an easy way to kind of make sure that you're staying within a particular scale if you want. Okay, so we've gone about 3 hours and 15 minutes. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's question. Try to answer them kind of succinctly and as completely as possible. I hope that everyone has learned a couple tips and tricks. If you learned something new, feel free to give a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy in our stay home time. And as we work with this, if you're a Cubase user, or if you're new to it, Steinberg is offering a stay home elements collection. So that gives you a 60-day license of Cubase elements, Wavelab elements, Dorico elements, and the Absolute 4. So if you're like, okay, I want to check out the Grand or play around with Hallion or the Hallion Symphonic Orchestra, that'll give you 60 days to kind of really check it out. So take advantage of that. And we'll be doing another hangout on Tuesday of next week. So, and if you want to send questions in advance, send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up because, as my son told me a couple minutes ago, I was done. So I have to go pay a little bit of attention to him. So thank you so much for all the wonderful questions. It's great to see so many people from all over the world. And again, everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you on the next Hangout. Goodbye.